Cumberland Presbyterian Church. This is our message for Sunday, October the 1st. We at the church will be celebrating communion on October the 1st, and so that will be reflected in the message today too. I hope you find this to be meaningful to you. The text today is from Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7, where it says this: "From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, 'Give us water to drink.' Moses said to them, 'Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?' But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?' So Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me.' The Lord said to Moses, 'Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink.' Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?'" My sermon title today is the Lord among us or not?" There are some things that we need to survive. Air, of course. Food, of course. And water. Without water, people don't last very long. You might be aware of this. The desert is not a place that has very much water. And so the Israelites found themselves with a huge company of people out in the middle of the desert, not able to go back to where they'd come from, and not able to go into the new land just yet. And they were getting just a little thirsty. I don't know about you, but when I get hungry or thirsty or feel bad in some other way, I tend to get just a little bit grumpy. Anybody else out there like that? And that's usually like if my lunch is later than I expected it to be, right? It's not that I have these long periods that I go without eating or drinking. In fact, even when I do have a period like that, I know that I have access to whatever I need. In this day and age, all I have to do is fire up Uber Eats, and within a few minutes I can get just about whatever I want. But back to the Israelites. They were wandering around the desert, and they were carrying all their belongings. There were all these people to feed and get water for, and don't forget, they had their livestock with them too. They had to care for them as well. And they couldn't just turn on a tap. They had to search for water. There was no guarantee at all that if they moved to a new spot, they would find anything to sustain them. Just imagine the stress that would place on you if you didn't know where you were going to get water that day at all, or for several days in a row. No wonder the people were a little bit out of sorts when they came to Moses. I mean, I confess, I would probably be out of sorts too. I'm actually surprised Moses doesn't seem as worried about the water problem as he was about the people problem. But I guess that comes from having that type of relationship with God. So just for a moment, can you try to put yourself in the Israelite shoes? How desperate might you feel? How frightened might you be? And if you had a family, how might you feel about not having water to give to your parents, or not having water to give to your children? You know, we tend to give the Israelites a hard time for their lack of faith in these difficult times, but how many of us could have kept from panicking when the water ran out and we didn't know where it might come from? And yet, God provided. I wonder about this, though, sometimes, too. Why would God allow the Israelites to get to the point where they feared for their lives before providing for them. I mean, surely God knew they needed water before they asked Moses. Surely Moses knew they needed water. Moses himself needed water. Why did it come to the point that the people were seriously worried about their lives? Was the complaining part of the process by which God provided? Well, Jesus often talks about the importance of bringing our cares to God. He even talks about like a persistent widow who consistently takes her case before this lazy and bad judge. And the judge finally gives her what she wants, not because he thinks it's the right thing, just because he wants her to go away. Jesus tells us to bring our cares to the Lord, who's much better than that lazy judge, right? Bring our cares to the Lord and ask, and we will receive. And so I wonder, why did it have to get so bad for the Israelites? And why is it that Moses gets so mad at them? I mean, of course they're going to be afraid if they think they're not going to have water. Does it sometimes seem like God waits for us to get to these desperate points in order to teach us a lesson? I've heard people say that, but it doesn't sound much like our loving God to me. I mean, we all need to rely on God, that's true. But would God really want to frighten us into submission? Maybe sometimes that is the best way to get our attention, but something about that solution just doesn't feel right. The biggest thing that I think we need to learn from this story and from many other stories in Scripture is the answer to this question that the Israelites asked. Is the Lord among us or not? Is the Lord among us or not? Have you ever asked this question? Have you ever thought that maybe God had forgotten you? Has it ever occurred to you that you don't know how to be sure that you have God's attention or that God is working to provide for you? Well, I guess one way to think about this is, have you ever been thirsty? Now, of course, we've all been thirsty to a certain degree, but I'm not talking about thirst for water here. I mean, have you ever been drained in some part of your life so fully that you didn't know how you were going to go on? Maybe it happened when someone close to you had a debilitating disease, or maybe they passed away. Or maybe it happened as you tried to find answers for your child who was sick. Or maybe it happened as you faced some type of difficulty in your own life. And as you did this, you might have asked the question, is the Lord with me or not? Now, there are lots of people who want to make this a really simple answer, but our experience of life is seldom as simple as we would like it to be. I can easily tell you, God never leaves you or forsakes you, and I do indeed believe that, but I also know there are times when it feels like you're all alone, or like you don't have the strength to go on, or like your cisterns are empty and there's nothing with which to fill them. And I know this because I've felt it myself. I don't ever doubt that God is with me, but I do wonder how it is that God is with me sometimes. I mean, if God is with me, why doesn't God just show me the rock to hit with my staff to make everything better? If God's with me, why can't I just call on God and have God fix things up for me? I go back to the Israelites. This is a section of the lectionary that's selected for one Sunday of the year. And if we just read this portion, it sounds like a problem came up, the people complained, God fixed it. And that's a good way to tell the story, but it's not complete. Because as soon as this issue is resolved, another issue comes up. And then another one, and then another one. And every time the Israelites wonder, is God with us or not? Do we maybe do this too? How many times does God need to be proven before we simply trust that God is there? And can we accept that even if God is there, that doesn't always mean that things will work out or get fixed. People don't always recover from bad things. Accidents take people from our lives. And still, the Lord is with us. We might have a better perspective on these things if we consider the cross itself. Now, of course, the Israelites in our story today could never have imagined God being with us in the way God was with us on the cross. Jesus' suffering even gave him a moment of questioning when he asked, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or maybe, in other words, "Lord, are you with me or not?" And yet we know that God remained with Christ through the suffering, through his death, even raising him from the dead. The eternal presence of God with us is something we celebrate when we take the sacrament of communion. We recognize that God has given us this ritual to remind us that God was not only present with us as the all-powerful one, but God was present with us in the form of a human who, like us, could suffer, could fear, could wonder, could even feel abandoned. Because God has shown us such great love in that way, we can be reminded through communion, and we can be certain in our own lives that are filled with triumphs and fears, that God is with us at all times. Trials last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Fears overwhelm us, but they do not overtake us. In our faith, we know that God is providing for us. Now, sometimes it isn't as much as we might hope for. And sometimes we do suffer. But God is always there. And because God came in the form of Christ, even when we suffer, God knows just how we feel. And so the answer to the question, is the Lord with us or not, is a resounding yes. Yes, the Lord is with us. Yes, the Lord knows us. Yes, the Lord even sent Christ to be with us in a special way so we can always know God understands and God is present, even in our darkest moments. We still find ourselves in desert places, thirsting for water, for relief, for grace, for goodness. We can rely on God's presence through those pains and trials. And as we recover, we can be even closer to God. That doesn't mean God designs these trials to draw us closer, but God can use them for the good of our relationship with God. And God's presence in the elements of communion is a reminder to us that God is with us, around us, inside us, all the time. It may be easier to see when we're in times of plenty, but the promise is always true. God is with you. I pray you may be nourished by the gift of the sacrament of communion and by these words this day as you recognize God's presence with you, whatever you are going through. God's grace remain with you. Amen.
Breathe in me, poor and lowly. Breathe in me, light me a fire. Come over me, meek and restless, Spirit of God. Breathe in me.